Hello, hello. Everybody, if you could take your seat, which it looks like everybody has. Hi, my name is Ben Wainblatt, a second-year medical student over here, and also a Jew. And yes, so this event is our Yom HaShoah event, Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we're here to commemorate all those that passed away in the Holocaust, as well as all those who managed to survive. And so why is this event important? You know, we're in a medical school right now, so we learn a lot of science, and we use this instrument right here, stethoscope. This is useless without the humanity to back it up. We had Nazi doctors that tortured and killed many, many children and many others beyond that. So what good is this without the heart to back it up? So the Holocaust, it did happen over 70 years ago, and unfortunately, many of our survivors are passing away. And someone who recently passed away was the grandmother of Ben Willen here. So Ben Willen is going to share with us a few words about his grandmother.
Thank you. So just thank you, everybody who came out. I know the Holocaust is one of those things that personally, it was very close to me throughout my life. But it's one of those things people don't want to talk about. I felt uncomfortable talking about it. It makes people feel uncomfortable. But it took me till probably my 20s before I really felt like it was an honor. It was a badge that I wore. I was proud of it. So my family was deeply affected by the Holocaust. So I'm going to tell you about my grandmother, Steph, who passed away just in December. And I'll briefly talk about another member of my family who just passed away last month, also a survivor. So my grandmother, Steph, she passed away in December at the age of 95. She was the matriarch of our family. She grew up in Lvov, which is now part of modern-day Ukraine, but it's basically on the border of Poland. Her journey began while off at university. She was actually studying to be a doctor. So she had just started medical school. But her journey was quickly halted by the Nazis. Her family fled the country in 1941, but they were quickly captured, and they were detained at a forced labor camp. There she worked as a seamstress. In the spring of 1942, still in the labor camp, Stephanie had learned of a planned escape. Her father assured her that this was her only chance, and she had to leave. At the age of only 19, she led a group of children, and with 30 other teenagers, she led them into the forest. They had to cut barbed wire fences and were under fire from Germans. They made it into the forest, and they survived for 2 years. She didn't know if she would survive, and each day was a struggle. After the Russians liberated Lvov, she returned home, but no one was there to come to her. Her parents and her sisters were murdered. She was the only survivor on her father's side. She was alone. She made her way to Munich and met my grandfather, Michael Donner. He also survived with his brother. He escaped death at Auschwitz after being shot on a death march. After being shot, he was placed in a ditch with dead bodies, and he held still until the Nazis left. After the war, he was a jeweler and had an apartment. The story goes that he had heard about this lonely woman who had survived as well. They lived in Munich. He had a place. He felt sorry for her, alone and lost, so he took her in. They fell in love and got married in 1945. She was well educated, came from a family that stressed education. Together they kept a kosher home, a traditional home, and raised their family. Somehow, though, they went through Ellis Island and made their way to Cleveland. She took a job working for the IRS as an interpreter. She knew 9 languages. She would go on to testify against a Nazi in a German trial. On a lighter side, she was known for her gefilte fish. It started with a live carp in the bathtub. It had to be really fresh and freshly ground. Her gefilte fish was on every holiday table, and still no one can make it like hers. She'd say, they can take away your money, your jewelry, your land, and even your home, but they can't take away your knowledge and your mind. She believed in education and was so proud of my parents for their medical careers, and now with mine as a medical student. Grandma always asked how I was doing. She may have lost most of her vision, but nearly every time I saw her, she recognized me. Her first words were always, "How are you doing in school? Do you like biology? Do you like chemistry?" Those were my favorite subjects. I always couldn't, help but talk to her about it. I got daily messages from my mom that Grandma wanted to know how I was doing in med school. For Grandma Steph, survival was paramount. She may not have been the warm and fuzzy person or the grandparent that most people had, but she had an incredible will to survive, and she never gave in. She had colon cancer at the age of 83 and liver cancer at the age of 87. She survived both, and when going to surgery to remove her liver cancer, she told my mother, "Hitler couldn't kill me. Why be afraid of a little cancer?" She survived cancer twice, the death of 2 husbands, 2 children, and the loss of her entire family during the Holocaust. She survived it all. She never talked about the war until her final years. It was a mystery. The only person that knew the horrors of her experiences was her. She only shared the information at the end. She talked about her uncle, who was an orthopedic surgeon, and had to set her leg in the middle of a concentration camp after she'd been pushed down a flight of stairs and broke her femur. She never got to finish her education and become a physician, but I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to be the 4th generation in my family to pursue medicine. I'd like to also quickly mention a second Holocaust survivor. My grandfather's brother, Aby, also passed away last month. In a family of only a dozen people, we were blessed to be surrounded by 2 incredible survivors, mentors, and human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to share with us now a poem by Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor and recently passed away this past year. So Brandon Schwartz here to share with us.
Good evening, everyone. I believe Abraham, despite Treblinka. I believe Isaac because of Belsen. I believe Jacob because and in spite of Majdanek. Dead in vain, dead for naught, I believe. Pray men, pray to God, against God, for God. I believe. Whether the Messiah comes, I believe. Or is late in coming, I believe. Whether God is silent or weeps, I believe. I believe for him, in spite of him. I believe in you, even against your will, even if you punish me for believing in you. Blessed are the fools who shout their faith. Blessed are the fools who go on laughing, who mock the man who mocks the Jew, who help their brothers singing over and over and over. I believe. I believe in the coming of the Messiah, and though he tarries, I wait daily for his coming. I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now we have our keynote speaker here, Martin Lowenberg, survivor of 5 concentration camps, correct? And all the way from Detroit, actually, former Daytonian, and my 3rd cousin, Martin Lowenberg.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben, for the nice introduction. But one thing I think you forgot to introduce your mother, who came all the way from Cleveland. But not just did she come by herself, but she brought her mother, which is a wonderful tribute. And that is very nice. And I know they're very, very proud of you. I know I am. Because I've known your grandmother for a few years. We just met casually, about over 60 some odd years, casually. Right? And also, I welcome my wife. I welcome all you nice people, the ones who just put this program together. And it's not an easy task. You have done a tremendous job by inviting all these people, by doing something that is really worthwhile in the name of Yom HaShoah, because that is what today. What is the meaning of Yom HaShoah? Yom means day, and Shoah means remembrance. And Yom HaShoah is being remembered, not celebrated, but remembered today pretty much all over the world. And people have gathered together because there are, unfortunately, not too many more survivors left who went through the terrible times and the terrible years in captivity, in the Holocaust. And it is so important to remember those souls who perished. It's unbelievable to think what has happened in those terrible years when 6 million Jewish people and 5 million non-Jewish people were killed. And of course, the worst place was Auschwitz. But there were hundreds of more places where people suffered and where people starved. And it's very difficult to explain. Why? Oh yes, there is a reason why. And we wonder, what is the reason? The reason is hate. And we see it all the time. And we see it all over again. That terrible word of hate and jealousy. Each letter in the word of hate represents many more words with the same meaning: horror, humility, hunger, harassment, and so on. You can take the next letter, which is A, atrocities, anger, awful, abolishment. The next letter is T, torture, torment, terror, trauma. And the last letter would be E, in the word of hate. And E stands for execution. E stands for elimination. E stands for experimentation. Experiments. Do you know what experiments mean? I have spoken many times already, or a number of times, not many, to students, to medical students, and I spoke to them about deadly medicine, I don't know if you ever heard the word. Deadly medicine was practiced during the Holocaust. Where there were many, many doctors, and one that was so famous for what he did, what he shouldn't have done, is experience on little children. And that was done in Auschwitz. And his name was Dr. Joseph Mengele, Mengele, the worst one. Because of him, there were over 300 little children that has suffered with experimentation of all kinds, injecting them with cancer cells, injected them with all kinds of cells, and even gasoline. He was the worst. He killed 300, over 300. Read the books on Mengele. Read the books on some of these others, and you will find the word deadly medicine. I normally don't mention it, but you're in that field, and you're now studying. And to think that these people, they could have cured people, they could have helped people, but instead, they enjoyed to kill. Yes, there are stories you would think, how was that possible? One and a half million children under the age of 15 were killed. Were killed in Auschwitz alone. Beautiful Jewish children who never had a chance to play games, who never had a chance to enter school, to go to school, to learn, to even graduate from kindergarten. And when they're talking about middle school, elementary school, middle school, or high school, what we're talking about, they had no chance. They had no chance later on to meet people, to meet friends, to get married, to become parents or grandparents or even great-grandparents, which would have been the case today. No, they were not given that chance. And these are just the little children. And what about the adults who had no chance either? It was unbelievable what happened during those years. And those years were from 1941 until 1945. Just a short time. But it all started on January the 30th, 1933, when Hitler came to power. And that's when I started to suffer. That's when I was already harassed. That's when some people could no longer stay in Frankfurt or anywhere else, but they were lucky enough to come here. And because of these people's foresight and able that somebody vouched for them to come here. You are here today, and you are here today because your parents had the foresight. They were wonderful people. Unfortunately, your grandparents couldn't make it. I did not meet her and meet your grandmother, but I heard so much about her. And all these people, not just individual cases, but so many people wanted to get out and you could not. It was very, very difficult. It was very expensive. And besides, you did not have anybody that would vouch for you, that would say, oh, we're going to help you. And if you can't, we'll find a way to help. But it was very difficult. And then besides, the fare itself was very expensive because you had to be at least for a week to 2 weeks on crossing the ocean. So there was always something going on. There was always a reason for many of these people not to come to safety. Yes, Emma Lazarus said, give me your hand. But it was too far. You could not reach it. And she's the one that wrote that poem at the Statue of Liberty. So much. But how did it all start? And I can tell you that right now. Oops. This is the little village that I was born in Germany. Beautiful village. And there's nothing wrong with the village itself. Like so many places around here, anything like that. They cannot talk back, but they give enough produce. But it was the people inside that caused it, that later caused it. There's a tree in that village, and that tree is over 1,000 years old, but imagine it's still blooming even today, I know. I happen to know that. But the Jewish people are no longer there. They chased them out because they thought we were like dirt. So many of them, not everybody. Yes, there were good times, there were bad times. I remember mostly the bad times. Why? These were my grandparents, and they were born there. And as a matter of fact, they're buried there in that village. Like so many people. They had a wonderful life. They helped build the communities. They didn't go around with an open hand. Yes. They helped build those communities. And they were respected people. They weren't thieves or whatever. No. They were decent people. So these people, they had a good life way before I was born. These were my parents. They were also born there. And my mother bore 7 children. And they had a good life until Hitler came to power. Where are they now? Their ashes are scattered around in Auschwitz. My own parents. And believe me, every time I speak about it, it hurts. And I do speak a lot about it. Because why did it have to happen? Why gas? Why burn? What a terrible thought. People think that there were only a few concentration camps. This article appeared in the New York Times in 2013, and here it shows with the dots, if you can see it, concentration camps. There were hundreds of those scattered around in Europe. And there were millions of people that were incarcerated in those concentration camps. And millions of people starved and were tortured, and they were died, and they were killed. This is just before Hitler came to power. This picture was taken, and that was in 1933. That little boy, that's me when I was 5 years old, and here is my sister Eva when she was 8 years old. These people belonged to a Hakoah, to the Maccabee soccer club. And they had a lot of fun. But then when Hitler came to power, nobody wanted to play against them anymore. We don't want to play against those Jews. Not just Jews, but the damn Jews. And that was how they referred to us. As I said, Hitler came to power on January the 30th of 1933. January the 30th. On March 15th, there were some farmhands sitting in a bar having a drink, and somebody came up and says, "I'll buy you more. Go ahead, drink as much as you want, but be sure and burn down that Jew's house." That night, they destroyed everything that we had. And whatever was not destroyed in that fire, they looted. So we became very poor. That was one of the main reasons why we couldn't leave Germany then. Because some people say, "Why didn't you leave right away then?" No, things were not that bad then. And we were hoping that Hitler would not be the leader for very long. But things changed, and it got much worse. So people helped us build this house. And it was a nice house. But my oldest siblings already, they were in the early 20s, and they were called "you damn Jew, drop dead, you Jew," and all kinds of names. So my oldest sister and brother, they said, we can't stay here. There is no future for us. And Hitler used to say, "Jews go to Palestine." And that's exactly what they did. They had a chance to emigrate to Palestine. Such was life over there, because it was just in the beginning. And not all of it you would call Holocaust. That was not a Holocaust yet. Those were the times before. And they made it so hard for us. They took away our citizenship that, like anybody else, we cherish that. My father was an officer in the First World War, and he fought for Germany for 4 years. Yes. From 1914 until 1920. And that's why my mother did not bear any children during that period, because my father was not home. He was in the war at the time. But of course, all that, with all these men that were fighting for Germany at the time, that was the thanks. The hate and the anti-Semitism that evolved over there. But later on, in 1934, my mother gave birth to twin boys. On the left was Fritz, on the right was Kurt. And they're being held by Eva and another sister who was born in 1920, and her name is Margaret. Eva is in a home now in New Jersey, and I visited her last week, or at least my wife Carol and I, we visited her. And then here is Margaret, and she is 96 years old and lives in California. Unfortunately, physically they're okay, but mentally they're not. But of course the twins are no longer here. And I come because they were killed the same time with my parents. And they were 9 years old at the time. What had they ever done to hurt anybody? Yes. This was the house, this is the house the way it's standing today, but of course it doesn't belong to us. But people already became so, in general, people became so hateful, insulting, because like on April the 7th, 1933, they said, we're going to have a meeting about those Jews. St. Clairsfeld was the place where I was born, and this is where we lived. But we have to talk about those Jewish bloodsuckers, the liars, the thieves. And that's what they called us. Here's another, piece in a newspaper, the same time, only a few days different, and here in a different community. They wanted to build a gallows and hang the Jewish teacher. Oh, the suffering was already there. But what can we do? We can't fight. We were quiet. And we were wondering it's going to wasn't going to be so bad, but it did. Germans beware, don't buy from Jews. They even stood in front of a, in front of a store, Woolworth. Here in the United States, they were very popular, these stores, but there were also many outlets that they had in Germany as well. It was an American company, but these people They didn't know any difference. Somebody gave them the uniform. These were not soldiers. Hitler gave them the uniforms. You are now my soldiers. And they stood in front of these stores, boycotting them. They also demonstrated twice a week in many of the cities to show the force. And these were all Hitler's people. And as a matter of fact, they even saluted him. The young people were instructed with by this newspaper, which came out once a week. These boys were destructive. Compare them to Boys Club of America, which is constructive. But here, on the bottom, there was a slogan, "The Jews are our biggest misfortune." So much of it went on over the years, just in a short time. This is the school that I was in, the public school. April the 20th of 1936, to be exact. Why? Because April 20th was Hitler's birthday. And the teacher that I had already, he wanted to celebrate his birthday, Hitler's birthday, a little different. Not with refreshments or anything like that. But he pointed over to me and he said, "Come out here." And I had to go in front of the classroom. And he accused me of having stuck out my tongue at Hitler's picture. "Oh, thank you. You're very kind. Thank you very much." And I denied it. And I said it wasn't true. But he insisted, "Yes, you did." So he asked 4 boys, older boys, from the back to come up and said, "Beat him up." Because look what he did. And I can never ever forget that. But that was not enough. That was not enough. When he was standing over there on the side, he had a board in his head which was covered with thumbtacks and nails sticking up. And he came up and he put that down on his chair, and they picked me up from the floor and pushed me right on top of it. You don't have to believe that, but you can, because it happened to me. And when I was over in Germany a few years ago, there were 2 ladies that came up to me afterward, and they said, "Martin, we remember that. We were in the same class that time." I said, "Well, I remember it too." Anyway, my parents had to send me away to a boarding school. The Jewish boarding school, which was about 150 miles from home. And of course, suddenly, I couldn't come home anymore. For 2 years, I was gone. From 1936 until 1938. And the people, and although there were many, many children in that school, Jewish children, and we also had Jewish teachers, counselors. Actually, we were very well taken care of, except we did not have when we could not feel the love of our parents and our family. I didn't even see the little ones grow up. But here, I was in this building, and it was up on top. This is where the faculty was living, and the counselors. The floor below that was the girls' floor. Then the one below that was the boys' floor, and underneath were the classrooms. And thank God we did learn a lot. We had good teachers, we had good counselors, and we were very well taken care of, but we were homesick. We cried many nights. We could only send postal cards home once a week, and then also in return we received the postal cards from our parents. And here we are, the little children. And the one with the circle, that's me. This was in 1937 when I was 9 years old. Yes, I was separated from my family for 2 long years. And believe me, it was difficult. But somehow we all became a little bit independent. But it wasn't necessary. We had wonderful, we had a doctor there, we had a nurse there, we had counselors. So everybody, and the principal, and the teachers were all Jewish. So we were able to keep our religion the way we had it at home. We did learn a lot. But as I said before, we could not enjoy the love of our family and our parents. This was in 1937, and that was the only picture that was taken of our family. Except my 2 oldest siblings were already at the time in Palestine. But here's Margot, and she was 17 years old in this picture. And she was taking care of children in Frankfurt, as a matter of fact, for a family. And that particular family had a chance to emigrate to the United States. So needless to say, she asked him, she told him that she would like to come along. But of course, her name had to be put under the affidavit. And as, I don't know, as what, as a daughter, as a friend, as whatever, but yet again, but also as to take care of their children. So my father paid for all the expenses, and so she left, luckily. The rest of us were left behind. Eva was 14 in this picture. I was 9 years old, and the twins were 3 years old, and my parents. As I said, that is the last family picture that was taken. Because at that time, they didn't have the phone, they didn't have this and that, like people have today. You could not take any pictures. Unless you were very wealthy and you had a very expensive camera, which was usually referred to as Leica. The synagogues were very, all the holidays were always so well celebrated. And the synagogues were decorated this time of year, because there's a holiday comes after Passover called Shavuos, and they used to have all garlands and everything else, which was just smelled beautiful. Everything was gorgeous. And here, even on Chanukah, the cantor or the rabbi used to light a candle every night on Hanukkah. But then, in 1938, we were forced to leave our homes, and we had to move to a larger city. We could no longer live in our houses. They forced us to sell it. And not only to sell it, but for the lowest price that they could get, that we could get. And so, exactly what we did. So we moved to a larger city. And of course, there were more Jews now. But we were able to go to services. And that part was okay. But on November the 8th of 1938, suddenly, while we were sitting in the classroom, stones and rocks came flying through the windows. 3 of my fellow classmates, as a matter of fact, were hit from the stones and the shards of glass, and they were bleeding. It was terrible. That's not really the word for it. We were scared. But the teacher immediately said, run home as fast as you can. And our way home, the synagogue was already burning. It was already in flames. And we are really scared. What's going to happen to us? There were people that were taken from their homes on that particular day and were beaten in the middle of the streets all over Germany. There were close to 100 people that died on that particular day, or from being attacked like that. Synagogues were burning all over Germany and Austria. Hundreds and hundreds of them. It's called, in English, the Night of Broken Glass, but we always have referred to it as Kristallnacht. And the Germans also called it Kristallnacht, like broken crystal. But suddenly, synagogues are gone. Pretty much all over Germany. No more. As a matter of fact, many, many years ago, Martin Luther, in the year of 1553, he wanted to convert all Jews to Christianity. Naturally, he did not succeed. But he said, if I cannot do that, we have to burn down their synagogues and let grass grow over it. Well, recently I heard where many of the synagogues once stood, grass is growing now. They won't build on it out of respect, but still the grass is growing. This is what it looked like. Everything was gone. It was pretty sad. This was our school, and now it's an apartment house. And where the synagogue was right adjacent to it, it's a parking lot. So therefore you'll hardly find any synagogues in Germany, because religious Jews will not go over there. You'll find a lot of Jews in the big cities. But they came from Russia or Israel, and they didn't suffer. They did not suffer the way we suffered. They did not lose like what we lost. So, we're having a good time. This was our synagogue in our little village, and which was right adjacent to a place a house where Christian people were living, and of course that wasn't burned down, but it was torn down. This was a synagogue in the town where I went to school, and excuse me, but nobody will go there for services. Yes, they're having parties there, they have special affairs and so forth for the people that come there. But it's not being used for services. Anyway, that's the reason what happened. On November the 8th, 1938, where so much of us was destroyed. But not everything yet. The worst was yet to come. And the next morning, November 9th, somebody was coming up the stairs. And immediately we knew, first of all, nobody's going to walk up like this. A decent person. It was a policeman and a Nazi soldier pounding on our door. My father opened the door. I stood right next to him, 10 years old. And my father went like this, and I wouldn't even move. And the policeman says, "Come with us," to my father. And my father says, "What for? I haven't done anything." Now the policeman insisted, "You better come with us." And my father says, "Are you going to arrest us? Are you going to arrest me?" And the policeman says, "Yes." So he told him that he was an officer in the First World War, but it didn't mean anything. My father had to go with them, and so did everybody else. So they arrested every man from the age of 18 up to the age of 60. Wasn't your father also arrested that time? Do you remember? Yes, I do remember that. Yes. Did he ever tell you about it? See? I remember that too. Here, in Buchenwald, that's where they stood. Their hair was cut, was shorn. Pretty sad. Fortunately, they were not there very long. They were there most of them were there for a month. Some of them stayed there, and some never ever came back to their families. It was pretty sad. Some people had a chance to emigrate, to leave and go. I think your family did. They left right after that. Yes. We couldn't go. For us, it was hopeless, but yet again, we still thought maybe things are going to get better. It's not going to be like this. Because you see, when your mind and your heart and everything else is so embedded in the place where you have lived and enjoyed everybody, suddenly, goodbye. No. It was very hard to leave. And it was expensive. I mean, you couldn't. So anyway, some people were fortunate. So think about it. Because of that, he's here today. She's here today. And you were able to be here also. Right? It was, your father had good foresight. I remember the stories. This was my father after he came home. He had to take pick and shovel and go and dig ditches. Yes. Trenches. Because they were now getting ready for the war. And the war was imminent, and it already started in 1939 between England and the United States and England and Germany. And it went so fast, and because the planes used to fly over our houses and so forth, in the middle of the night, and the sirens were always going. So a lot of people didn't have a shelter. So they were the ones that had to dig trenches so people could go down there for safety. The Jews had to do that. The pay was hardly anything to talk about. They didn't get anything. People wanted to get out, so they stood in front of the police department and wanted to get an ID because we were no longer citizens. They took their citizenship away a long time ago. So here, in order to go away, we need some kind of identification card. You didn't have a American Express credit card, and you didn't even have a driver's license. So here they were standing. But they also, at the same time, this is my birth certificate, and at the same time, they added to my birth certificate, which was on 9th of February of 1939, that from now on, every Jew is going to have a middle name. And for men, they gave the middle name of Israel, and for women, the middle name of Sarah. So every woman had that middle name, because with the biblical name like this, they knew immediately it was a Jew, which was not rescinded until 1949. The war was over in 1945. And here you can see her name was Ursula. Well, now it's Ursula Sarah. And his name was Herbert, but now it's Herbert Israel. But there was that big J for Jew. So somebody came up and says, here, let me see your identification. You had to show it to him because you didn't know who he was. This was my bar mitzvah picture. When I was confirmed, when I was 13 years old. But we didn't have a party. We didn't have anything. Yes, that's the way I looked. And what was worse, the two little boys They were supposed to go to school when they were 6 years old. And my mother, they had to take a picture, a school picture. So my mother went to the store and wanted to buy them some clothing, but they wouldn't go away, you Jew, we don't have any. So what happened now? My mother took a sheet and made the shirts, and she took an old coat and she sewed the pants, and she knitted the socks so they would look nice in the picture. Fortunately, they didn't know much about the whole situation. Why they had to make homemade clothing. But that's the way it was. That was the last picture of the boys. But then in 1941, we were given that star to wear. In German, it was Jude, and they tried to resemble that these are Hebrew letters, which they were not. But this way they could identify immediately a Jew. And of course in Holland, they spelled it J-O-O-D. In Belgium, just a plain J. And then in Poland or Eastern countries, they just had a simple yellow star. But now people had to wear this. And of course, you were not safe to go on the street when you wore this, because you were being attacked and beaten and so on. Because there were many, many people, like it is almost anywhere, who didn't like the Jews. Somebody asked me today, because I spoke at Bowling Green today, and somebody asked me there today, what about people that are so anti-Semitic? What do you answer them? I said, the best answer is, let them talk, even though we did that time. But somehow they're being repaid again. Because if they would have the type of education that any of you people have, they would know better. But unfortunately, some of these people, you cannot educate. You cannot correct. So what are you going to do? Ignore them. This was on December the 8th of 1941. And you can see here, this was the day when we were deported. And we didn't know where to. We had to meet that morning at the freight depot. And then after that, they sent us to the capital city of our state. And some people already had taken large suitcases and backpacks and everything, which they had to leave behind because they were told already ahead of time not to take anything except a small backpack or a small case. But they thought they could get away with it. But instead, they went like everybody else. And that afternoon, after we were taken to the capital city of our state, then here we had to stand and wait for the trains to come. And of course we accept, the only thing we expect were passenger trains. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Here, we were pushed into those railroad cars and cattle cars. And of course, we didn't know for how long. But we found out. We left on a Monday, and for 4 days and 4 nights, we were traveling. And there were no beds, and there were no tables, and there was nothing. It was just a plain wooden floor in these railroad cars. And the cattle cars, they smelled. And the screaming was so bad from people because there was no room. I was 13 years old then, and we were standing. We were standing for 4 days and 4 nights, believe it or not. How did we sleep? Like that. Because they wanted us to suffer. And we did suffer. So here, on Monday, we left Germany, and by Friday, we arrived in Riga, Latvia. "4 days and 4 nights. And every so often the train stopped, and there were 4 barrels in each corner so people could relieve themselves. But of course the people didn't have much to eat, so therefore there was not much refuse. But whenever the train stopped and the doors opened, somebody had to empty those big cans. And when we arrived, this is what it looked like. Pretty sad. Yes. Men, women, children. And they announced that anybody that is old and cannot walk to where we have to go, you can avail yourself to these trucks or to the buses. And there were some buses. But there was so much snow. And of course a lot of people went into those trucks. We had to walk for 5 long miles until we came to the ghetto. Yes. It took 5 miles until we got there. Imagine. And our fingers and our feet were already frostbitten. And the day hurt terrible. Until we came to the ghetto. And this was the outside of the ghetto. Of course, it was the pictures that taken at the time when it was, because the picture is taken much later, because as you can see, there's no snow there. But but as you can see those signs. They were posted all over, and there the guards walking up and down, And they were scattered around the entire ghetto, and here were these signs: any person that will try to cross the fence or will make contact with anyone through the fence will be shot without notice. And they did. This is the outside of the ghetto. And this is the the commander's headquarters, and that was his Mercedes. Excuse me. This monument was built in 2002, and it showed the people that they could not get into the ghetto, but instead they were taken over here. And of course, each transport that was coming in every time from all over Germany, now the people were taken over here. They had to undress first, and they had machine guns set up, and they were killed immediately. The stones represent the people as they were standing there. This was the inside of the ghetto. And before we arrived, there were 3,000 Latvian Jews living in here, because they already had been rounded up before and put into this ghetto. But 3,000 Jews were left. And before we arrived, they took those people and they took them over here, and they were killed. They had a massacre in 2 days. If you see all the furniture, there was food, there was furniture, there was everything as we came in. We could not touch that because it was all frozen to the ground. It was, nothing was, no matter how strong you were, you could not touch anything. So it was all like this because some people were hiding inside, and they made sure that everything was thrown out because they didn't want anybody inside, anybody to hide behind any of this furniture. This is what it was. Excuse me, please. In the morning, we had to go to work, and at least in the evening, we were able to come back home again. Some of these women, they were cleaning women. They were doing the cleaning for the SS. And also they were sewing and doing things. And in the evening, they could bring it home, bring it into the ghetto. But they had to make sure that the next morning, they had to bring every item back again. Otherwise, they would have been killed. But this is what it was. The men were used for cleanup service and so forth. But we had to, excuse me a minute. Thank you. We had to shovel the streets from snow, day in, day out. It was constantly snowing, and we were constantly doing that. Yes, sir.
Cough drops offered up from.
What is it?
Cough drops.
Oh, thank you very much.
Take care. This is medical school.
Very kind. Thank you. Anyway, that's very kind. So, and this is what happened for about a year and a half. When they took all the women, the young women between the age of 15 and 50, and they were being used for all kinds of details, for all kinds of cleanup, and the men were also being used. But then, that was not enough. So as you can see, how hard we had to work. We were slaves. And the women's heads were shaved. But then, a while later, so Eva was taken, and she had to say goodbye to my parents. But then also, a couple of months later, they took everyone from the ghetto, between the age of 15 and 50, and they were put in a concentration camp. They had built barracks, and the name of the concentration camp was called Kaiserwald. And I was taken, and I had to say goodbye to my parents, and I never saw them again. Yes. They gave us this uniform, and that's all we had. But we were slaves, and so were the women. They had to pull a railroad car. This is how we slept, in bunks, without any covering, any mattress or any pillows or anything like that. The only thing is that we were able to use underneath our heads were some of the vessels, some of the bowls that we could use for food in the morning and at night, when they gave us a soup. And the soup was usually from either potato skins and water, or else from maybe some vegetables, such as beans or whatever they had, carrots, beets. And it's all we had. Meat we never saw. And that's how they gave it to us, with a sponge. This was our barrack in Riga. That's the one I was in. And anywhere between 200 and 228 people in one of these barracks. But of course, there were still people left behind in the ghetto, and those were mostly children and older people, like my parents and the twins. And on November, I found out on November the 2nd of 1943, they took them to the freight depot, and they just pushed them into those cars, and didn't keep a count on them at all. And they sent them all the way from Riga down to Auschwitz. And of course, when they came to Auschwitz, as I told you earlier, that was the last trip for them. And especially for the twins, they announced Mengele, who wanted to have the twins. He loved twins. Well, I hope that my two little brothers went with my parents right into the gas chambers and the ovens, and did not have to suffer by his hands. But I'll never know. And there's no way of finding out either. Later on, a small contingent of us was taken by ship back to Germany, and we had to we had to fill. I mean, we had to load these canisters on the ship for transportation. These were empty ones that came from the front lines and were sent back to Germany so they could refill them, and then ultimately they were sent back to the front lines. But they never made it because the war did not last that long anymore. But we were in this prison here for 5 weeks. And while I was here, we went on a death march for 4 days and 4 nights. And whoever dropped over, well, and died, unfortunately, did not see freedom anymore. But while I was in Hamburg, I was on that death march. And for 4 days and 4 nights, we had to march until we came to the most northern place, another concentration camp in Kiel. And the distance was only 75 miles, but our march lasted for 4 days and 4 nights. And I was in that camp for 3 weeks. And on May the 2nd of 1945, we were summoned to the front gate of the camp, and they said, "Get in." And we didn't know exactly. We couldn't understand. We thought we were free now. But these were German trucks, and they had painted the Red Cross on there. We found that out later on, after we were liberated, that these trucks were filled with people then, and they had hoses attached to the tailpipe, and it went right inside. Those tailpipes, I mean, they had gas put into those hoses, and they went inside, and people were asphyxiated, people were killed immediately. Fortunately, I was on one of these trucks, and we finally wound up first in Denmark, and then we were liberated into Sweden. And of course, we were in quarantine first, and then in rehabilitation centers for 9 months. And while I was in a rehabilitation center, I was reunited with Eva again, who also was taken to Sweden. So a year later, we came here to this wonderful country, to the land of the free and the home of the brave. Any questions? Any questions whatsoever? I'm sure you may have some. Thank you, Ben.
Sure. Thank you. I could start off with a question here.
What is it?
So, where did you go when you came to the United States first? Or how did you know where to go?
Well, I'll tell you. When I came here to the United States, Eva, fortunately, she came with us, with me, but she already was able to get a job as a housekeeper. And of course, she was living with those people, whereas I had to, it was more difficult for me. Number one, I didn't speak the language. The people that Eva worked for knew German. So, of course, it was easier to communicate. I had to find people that I was able to communicate with. And, of course, there were many German people, German-speaking people at that time. And so, because they couldn't help me much, there were immigrants also. And, of course, it was right after the Depression here. And they used to say, oh, we had it so hard, we couldn't even buy any sugar or any flour. Well, that was tough. But anyway, I was finally, I was trying to go to the selective service and volunteer for armed services, but they wouldn't take me because I wasn't here long enough yet. So I had to be here a certain time, because if I would have been in the armed forces, then naturally I could be a citizen after a year and a half instead of waiting for 5 years. And also I would learn English among American servicemen, but they wouldn't take me right away. So instead, I finally found a job which was very difficult. I found a job as an errand boy, transporting merchandise ready to wear in the garment center. And that's the first thing I did. It was the reason I had a hard time finding a job is because a lot of the fellows just came out of the armed services. And of course, many of them got their jobs back that they held previously before they were inducted in the armed services, or otherwise there wasn't, and it was easier for them to find jobs than it would be for me, since I had problems with the language. Okay?
Were most of the young men your age very skeptical about the religion at that time?
They were what?
Were they skeptical about religion and saying, where is God now? Or did you still try to?
I think it's harder to understand with this. Yeah, what is it? What is it?
So were kids your age, did they try to denounce the religion, Judaism, and say, where is God now? Or did you try to maintain the faith and still have...
The ones that I knew, thank you very much. The ones that I knew were really, it was rather, I didn't even associate too much anymore with some of them after I came here, because we all had the same, we wanted to achieve the same thing. And we were looking for jobs, or we had jobs, and of course we could no longer, it was very difficult at the time to keep a Sabbath, because at that time, like today, there's 6-day work weeks, and Nobody works on a Saturday or on a Sunday. You see, that time, yes, people were constantly working, and of course, if you say you don't work on a Saturday, because of religion, a lot of them wouldn't hire you. Even Jewish people wouldn't hire you. So it was very, very difficult at that time, unless you tried the best and not work, or, you didn't stay away from work, but yet again, you would do things that you would not be allowed to. Like, if I had a right, or if I had to travel, if my job was not far from where I was living or something like that, I wouldn't take the subway. I wouldn't take, I would rather walk. So you had to adjust yourselves, which was the best way to live. But yet you were trying to support yourself, and that was not easy, you see. And we had to do it. Okay? Yes, sir.
I have a question about the concentration camps. Were there non-Jews in any of the 5 concentration camps that you were in? And
How is that, please?
with the 5 concentration camps, were there any non-Jewish people in those camps, or did they separate the non-Jews that they were going to exterminate and put them in a different camp?
There were non-Jews and Jews, both killed the same. They did not worry about whether they were not trying to separate by religion. Mm-hmm. They could care less about religion. Mm. They could care less about whether somebody was Jewish or not Jewish, or whether he was a gypsy or whatever he was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They treated. They didn't. It wasn't just the soldiers that did that. There were not only soldiers that were doing the punishing and everything. We had people that were assigned when we came into the camp, and they were assigned, and they were called capos, concentration camp police. Huh. And some of them wanted to prove to the Germans, to the soldiers, that I'm tough too. And they were pretty mean. Some of them were terrible, worse than the soldiers. Yes.
Wow. They were prisoners too?
Yeah. They were called capos, concentration camp police, but these were prisoners. And wow. Some of them, and then we even had people that came from Germany. There was serving life and death sentence in prisons, and they had committed the crimes before or during the war, even before the war. And there was serving death sentences. But then they say, what are we keeping these people for? We're going to use them as capos. Mm. And they had been mistreated already in the prisons, in the penitentiaries, by their guards at the time. But now they had the upper hand over us. And they would do the worst that you could not imagine. Mm. You cannot imagine. Mm. Right?
Wow.
Oh, you want to say something?
I have a question, but someone over there had one first.
I just wanted to know how your family pictures survived the war.
Pardon me. What?
I just wanted to know how your family pictures survived the war. all the pictures you were showing us?
Many times people ask me that. Well, first of all, the family pictures, my mother sent them to my siblings that were in Palestine at the time, to show, and also to my sister in America. And that's how these two pictures came out. Some of the other pictures, like the ones from Riga, there were two ladies in the ghetto in Riga, and one day, two gentlemen came in. They were from Italy, and the sisters apparently were also from Italy, but because Italy, the Jews in Italy weren't really yet being persecuted as much. So this man, one was the brother and the other one was an official in the Italian government. They went to the commander and says, here, we are on the same level, and would you release those two women who are sisters of this gentleman? So the commander said, we will not release anybody that's in here. You see. So ultimately, they stayed. We didn't know those women because we were many thousands of people in our ghetto, and of course we didn't know them. But after the war, that one gentleman came to us in Sweden if we knew the whereabouts of his sisters. And of course we didn't know them, but he told us that while they were in Riga, and they walked around in the ghetto because the commander couldn't do anything about it. So they were walking around in the ghetto and took 6 pictures. And he gave us copies after the war of these. So that's how I happen to have the pictures of the ghetto. Otherwise, there are no more pictures. So somehow, some of the pictures that I show here were filtered in, out of the ghettos, out of the concentration camps, like the barracks and so forth. And this is how I happen to have these. And I'm able to show them. Okay? Now, she has a good question.
First, I want to say I grew up listening to many speakers.
Beban?
I've heard many speakers growing up, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone as articulate and paint a picture like you did. So that was wonderful. My 2 questions are...
If my wife wouldn't be here and my cousin wouldn't be here, I would give you a big kiss right now.
So my 2 questions are, you mentioned the siblings, you got the pictures. I'm wondering how long till you got reunited with the ones in Israel. And also, you knew the exact date your parents and twins went to Auschwitz. So I thought that was interesting how you knew that. And the Nazis are known for meticulous, record keeping. So did you ever see if maybe the twins were on one of Mengele's records, or you didn't want to go there? They tracked everything they did, I understand, for the most part.
Okay. First of all, thanks for the compliment. But number 2, as far as the dates, I was reading a book right now about that somebody gave me, and I've known that already, but this way I substantiated this much more. We found out that on the 2nd of November, they were taken to the freight depot from their homes in the ghetto, or from their apartments, from their rooms, and taken to the to the freight depot and loaded in all together, and the doors were shut. Somebody, a gentleman who, as a matter of fact, he happens to be a pilot for Delta, and he asked me already, Martin, I have a book about what happened in Riga, and my family came from Riga, was left in Riga, and he was a native. These were natives of Riga, Latvia, the parents and so forth. But somebody wrote a book of what really happened to the Jews in Riga. I just came across the dates again. It was November the 2nd of 1943 when they packed all these people into these railroad cars, and they shut the doors, and the trains took, and they went into Poland. There were already rumors that maybe those trains didn't leave. Maybe the people were killed right away in Riga. No, they didn't want to kill any more people in Riga and send them right down to the killing center of Auschwitz. And that book actually more or less gave me the definitely dates again. And I've known it for years. But now they substantiated these dates again. You could find out easy. And of course, there's a place in Germany, a tracing service. It's called, can't think of it, started with A. I'll think of it. And this tracing service has records of everybody, almost everybody, where they had records of. And 16 miles of it. And you can definitely find out, more so now, what happened to different people. So they kept records. They were very meticulous by keeping records. Okay? Anything else?
When did you see your siblings in Israel? After how many
Oh,
years?
yes. The first time I saw them, we saw each other, was in 1950. When my sister first came over with her son. Unfortunately, they all passed away now. And my brother and his wife and 2 sons, they also came over, and they settled in New Jersey. And of course, these 2 sons live in New Jersey, but my brother and his wife, they passed away also. So, families. At least my sisters are still alive now. Okay? Any more questions, please? Anybody? Don't hesitate. Yes? Oh, wait a minute, I got to give you your candy back.
That candy came from Stephanie Madge. That's right.
What is that?
This is the candy lady right here.
Okay.
This is the candy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's not the one he gave me, though. That's the one I had. Yes?
I'd say something nice about you, but I don't want you to kiss me.
No. I don't, because you'll be a scratches.
I hear that. I hear that. After your home was burned in your village, who helped rebuild it?
There were, we had family. My brother had sisters there, and of course my mother had an aunt there, but of course she couldn't help much. She was old, but it was the family, and of course neighbors. They were the ones that helped building the house. So we enjoyed that house, but only for a short time. My father even, they even built a warehouse for him. But my father couldn't sell anymore right after that. Couldn't sell any of those products to the farmers, feed and fertilizer and seed and so forth. And excuse me, and that's the business that we're in for years already. But nobody would buy anymore. And besides, to deliver was also very difficult because we couldn't have a horse and wagon anymore to deliver anything. Big sacks of produce and so forth. Who couldn't carry it? My father, the only way he could contact anyone was by bicycle. That was the only way to get around.
And when you were transported, in these photos that you have up, they had the covered trucks in which the people were gassed, and the open trucks, they weren't. And you just happened to be put in an open truck. And when who liberated you?
The Red Cross.
The Red Cross.
This was done by Count Bernadette. I don't know if you ever heard about him. He was the head of the Red Cross. And also, there were some Jewish people who were from Sweden, who went, because Sweden was a neutral country, but they went to Himmler. And they told him that we have 300 Jewish people in such and such concentration camp. We'll pay you well. Would you release them? And he said, the final solution states that every Jew on the face of the earth must be killed. And I will not release any Jews. So quick enough, they said, now, what about, we do have 300 Polish women, national women. Would you, in such a camp, would you release them? Give me the money. We went out as Polish women. Right?
Thank you.
Under the name of Polish women. Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody, any more questions? Yes, I'm coming down. I need the exercise. Yes, please.
Knowing how malnourished,
What is that, please?
knowing how little you had to eat when you were at the camp, how was your health during that time? And how was your health during the recovery after you were liberated?
Okay, first of all, after we were liberated, we were immediately put on a very strict diet, naturally, such as a little bit of mashed potatoes, a sunny side egg, maybe a little bit of milk, and so forth. But on the transport from Denmark to Sweden, as a matter of fact, in Denmark already, we were on trains. And at that time, they had regular packages that were called care packages. And it was distributed by the Jewish agencies. And those packages contained a loaf of bread, a pound of butter, ham, and spam, and all kinds of the wrong thing altogether. And some people, they gouged themselves with so much because they were so hungry. They had not seen anything like that. They have not eaten anything like that for a long time. And they were told, be careful what you eat and how much. I don't care what they say. Well, unfortunately, some of them did not survive because they got so sick, and some of them even passed away. But what we really got as a regular diet was very little and so much at each meal to get us back again. Because after all, how large was our intestine, our stomach? And that's what happened.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you have to watch what you're eating, basically. Some people eat too much, and of course you can see it. Yes, please.
It makes me wonder, you had so little to eat when you were at the camp, yet you still survived on such little caloric intake, so little to eat.
Well, I'll tell you, I had bypassed surgery back in '80s, and I said to the surgeon, I said, do you think some of that, what I just had, the surgery and so forth, some of that is because of the camps? He says, because maybe cholesterol and so on. He says, you had nothing to worry about cholesterol because you didn't have any. So that's what he said.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Excuse me. I'm doing fine. Okay. Yes? Who had a question? Okay.
You mentioned how quickly after Hitler came to power, neighbors, soccer mates, schoolmates just became very cruel.
They didn't turn. They opened up the closets,
Oh.
and they all came out.
Well, the question,
Pardon me, but somebody came today, and I mentioned it before. What do you think about some of the people that are anti-Semitic and so forth? Because anti-Semitism has really surfaced a lot here in this country. I said, well, it's been locked up for so long that some people say, oh, I can say whatever I want now.
yeah.
But it's not the right thing, and we know it's not true. Yes, please.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of people who were non-Jews who were very sympathetic?
I was very young. For that, I was very young. The people that, as far as my parents, the people that they knew, or at least they told us, they were very kind to us, really. And there were many, many wonderful, very kind people. Matter of fact, we even had a woman, before we left, she wanted to make sure that we have bread for Shabbos. Really. And she and my mother became very good friends. So you see, it's when people realize you're a normal people, there's nothing wrong with you. That's what happens. See. You want to ask me something?
Yeah, on a personal note, all the years that I've known him, which since I was about 14 at the time in our home, he is the most unselfish, hopeful, wishful, a man that I know at that time, young man. But I just want to remind everybody the slogan of never again. And his family, I don't know, I've lost count. He had 3 daughters. How many grandchildren? 14. 14 grandchildren.
Did you show her the pictures?
I just see her
Sure you
necklace.
do.
And 6 great-grandchildren. And really, life goes on. We have to have hope. We have to be aware, and never again.
Good. Well, to that comment, I will add something, that hate hurts, but love heals. And love can go a long, long way.
Cheryl?
And we can hope that it can, people in general do remember that. Really. Anybody else? I'll be very happy to entertain more questions. Anybody? Okay? Yes? Oh, where are we? I got one. All right, fine. I'll be very happy to. Okay.
So, I'm sure you're familiar with Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
So he was talking about how he searched for meaning in the camp and how that meaning came through. How did meaning come through for you in your experience?
I really never thought about it, to be honest. Because I accepted life. And the way people and life has been treating me. I talk about that. I talk about the Holocaust. And I somehow, yes, it has affected me. But yet again, in general, how it affected me, you say? That's what you want to know?
How did you find meaning to get through that experience as you went through it?
We think about it, okay? But it's a new life that we have to more consider. New families, everything else. What we have lost, we can never, ever replace. And what has happened to them, we can never repair, really. But thank God, life goes on. And it must go on. And you have to look at every single day that there is a tomorrow and not just thinking of the past. Yes, there were many, many people who says, oh, it was terrible, and look at what we did yesterday, and look at what we did 10 years ago, or 20, in the camps. Do you remember what we did in the camps? Do you this? No, I don't think about that. I would rather think about tomorrow, and this is how it affected me, about the future. My family, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. I look at that. My grandchildren's success, I look at that. So why be selfish about it and think back? Okay? Is that what you want to know? No?
No.
Yes?
Close
Yeah.
enough.
I mean, that's true. Really. I like to live life because life lives me. And that's what it is. Okay? Thank you. All right? Well, if there's no one else, I want to thank you so very, very much for coming. Really. And I want to wish all of you the very, very best in life. Thank you. Thank you. She looks like Bette Midler. Did anybody ever tell you that? You look like Bette Midler?
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
in the low dolly business.
That's all right. That's okay. You could do it.
She's Jewish.
Okay, what?
She's Jewish.
I know. I know.